Alright, so this week was a little bit slower than last week, and the grand total that we had sold was 39 items with an average price of $36.97, which brings our total for the week at $1441.83. That does not include shipping. That is only the sales price. Alright, first up we have a loon duck decoy. If you find these, and you can find them anywhere from under, $8-9. They're a good deal. This one, I'm sure, I generally buy them from Goodwill, somewhere in the neighborhood of $4.99 is generally what the price at. This one sold for $40. Sweet. Next, we have a sterling silver Michael Dawkins bracelet. This one sold for $45. Next up, we have a YSL. You have a St. Laurent pair of earrings, little blue rhinestone or crystal earrings. These ones sold for $90. Next up, we have a 14 karat gold S-Link angel necklace. This one sold for $130. Next up, we have a large daisy flower pendant necklace. This one sold for $12. Next up, we have a vintage dragonfly brooch. Brooches, brooches, brooches. This one sold for $13.99. Speaking of brooches, we have a lapel pin. This is a silver, they look like little Civil War type pistol crossing. Probably some sort of a military pin. I could not figure out which one it was or what it represents. This one sold for $15. Next up, we have an adjustable jade necklace. This one sold for $8.39. Generally on jade, you want to get higher prices, but this is just kind of like a junk. I'm not going to say junk jade necklace, but it kind of is more of a junky jade necklace. Next up, another golf club. This is a Ping. That's the only brand that I know of golf clubs, so I don't buy them very often. But when I do see a Ping, I pick them up. Usually they're $1.99. And this one sold for $20. I know a lot of people can get more money than this, but for me, $20. I think I sold one yesterday for $15, so $20, sweet. Next up, we have an antique Rogers Bros. This is the pattern is actually called vintage, and it's one you should look out for. It has like little grapes on there. This one sold for $35, and it's only, I think it's a group of like 9 or 10, so $3.50 a piece. Sweet. Next up, we have a vintage butterfly brooch. This one sold for $8. Next, we have a coffee mug. Not all coffee mugs will sell. Anytime you walk into a thrift store, you're going to find at least 100 of these. The key is to know what sells. This one is a vintage Niagara Falls, Canada mug. This one sold for $10.49, and I've had it for about 4 years. Next up, we have a 30-inch gold-plated frosted heart pendant necklace. This one sold for $12. Alright, here's a decent one. This one is a 14 karat gold, it's like 14 karat gold bead and malachite bracelet. Don't know why I'm doing this. It'd be on your wrist. And this one sold for $100. And being 2.14 grams, that's a good deal. Next up, I've had this shirt probably in the neighborhood of 5 or 6 years. It is a 2003 CarQuest drag racing shirt, and it's sold for $6.29. Next up, we have an antique snuff bottle. I remember when I bought this, I think it was 10 or 11 of these antique snuff bottles, and this one sold for $60. Next, we have a vintage Mason's Pink Vista soap dish. And I call it a soap dish because I really have no idea what it is, but that's about the size of it. And it sold for $21. Next up, we have a vintage black and white photograph. This is actually a personal item of mine. When my parents were going through a lot of their old stuff, they went through their photographs. No one knew who a lot of these people were anymore because they'd been passed down for generations. This one I sold for $3.35. I've probably sold at least half a dozen of these over time. So they just, you put it up there, it sits, and after a while it sells. Next, we have a vintage Kentucky long rifle. This almost looks like it'd be part of like a G.I. Joe figure. I couldn't figure out whose it was, so I put it up, $9, and it sold within, I think it was just under a month. Next, we have an antique silver plate candlesticks. These sold for $50, which is a really good price if you deal with candlesticks, because sterling silver ones sometimes you can't get $50 for. These next 3 sold to the same person. She was having, she was doing a wedding reception, and she was just buying a bunch of silver plate flatware sets, and she bought 3 of them for a total of $125. The first one that sold was a 52-piece Community Morningstar. Next up is a silver plate 24-piece set, and the last but not least was a Rogers Sovereign silver plate set. And so that came out to 52 plus 43, 95, 95 plus 20 equals 115 for 119. So 119 pieces for 125. Like I said before, I get silverware for 10 cents a piece. So that's pretty sweet. Next up, all right, so the cat just knocked over a glass. That's awesome. All right, where were we? Next up is a BCBG Max Azria. I never pronounce these weird names correctly. Statement necklace. This one sold for $11.34. Next up is a vintage Wedgwood necklace. This one sold for $40. Next up is a pair of vintage 14 karat gold amethyst they're like dangle earrings. These ones sold for $50, but they got returned. So next up we have a vintage abalone inlay brooch. This one sold for $10. Next up, these next 2 sold to the same people, the same person. The first one is a 14 karat gold rope chain, and the other one is a vintage mushroom stick pin. So last week I think I sold a stick pin, and I said that I don't sell very many, so 2, I've probably hit my quota for the year. These both sold to the same person for $205. Next up, we have a red necklace. It's a ruby red bead necklace, and this sold for $8. Next up, by Masons, we have a footed bowl. This one is a 10-inch by 4-inch footed bowl. This one sold for $50. Next up, we have an antique 1913 Furnival's creamer. This one sold for $35. This next one was kind of surprising to me because I've had it for a little bit of quite some time. I bought a lot of these trolls, haven't bought any since, but this one sold for $10. Next up, we have a vintage sterling silver cuff bracelet. This one sold for $21. Next up, we have a Goebel ashtray. This one sold for $19.90. Next up, we have a Woods Burlslim, I guess that's how you say it, teapot. Sold again for $50. Next up, we have a Swarovski crystal figures. This is actually, they're 2 kingfishers. I put this on a while back on what I bought. I saw a few that sold for $150, but they all had the box. So this one, I got an offer for $90. I took it, sold. Next up, this is also was in our closet. I don't even think these were ever worn by my wife, but there were these like, it's like the overalls, I guess, but yeah, overalls. Bib, pants, overall strap, I don't know. But in any event, they were by Amazon Wax, and they sold for $15. Last but not least, we have a pair of dangle cloisonne earrings, and they sold for $12.